Jane McCall and the Twilight Stacks. Chapter 20. The School. The next day, the twins met Jane in front of the elementary school and hustled her in through a side door as everybody else was hustling out. Nobody noticed the odd trio as they entered a classroom and settled in to wait. Luke attempted to get a conversation going, but Cail's standoffishness and Jane's awkwardness stymied his efforts. They all wound up playing on their phones and pretending the others weren't there. After what felt like an arbitrary amount of time, Cail stood up and gestured for the other two to follow her. Luke fell into step without so much as a hitch. Jane stumbled over her chair trying to catch up. They walked through the halls in triangle formation, the twins shoulder to shoulder and Jane at the back. Casual clubs had pretty much cleared out, and the sports teams were still stuck in practice. It left their route deserted. The hallway spat them out in the atrium connected to the main entrance of the school. The hallway continued straight past the other side of the room. The doors were to their right, and the greeter's desk was to their left. Behind the desk was a small open space where kids congregated before being picked up, mercifully empty at the moment, and behind that was a glass wall that showed off a small courtyard. A stone path wound a loop around the rectangular space, which was enclosed by red brick on three sides. A wooden bench provided seating, while crocus flowers, daffodils, and pansies popped up around larger bushes which had yet to bloom. Jane thought she recognized a couple of the almost ready ones as bleeding hearts. A single scrawny tree of indeterminate species acted as the centerpiece of the garden's layout. Jane knew instantly that this was the gateway to the twins' courtyard. Even if they hadn't escorted her right to it, her wrist had started tingling as soon as she'd laid eyes on the garden. Cail waved at the door set in the glass wall. "Here, as far as we can tell, you have to pick the lock, then knock 3 times on the door while only people looking for the courtyard are around. If you succeeded, you'll be where you want to be when you walk through the door." It reminded Jane of a benevolent version of the internet horror story she'd once stumbled across. She narrowed her eyes at one of the flowers beyond the glass. "Do I want to know how you figured this out?" Cail rolled her eyes. "I wanted to practice lock-picking, and this door was convenient. Luke decided to make a joke about being polite after I'd already picked the lock. We were both shocked by what we found on the other side." Jane nodded to show she was listening. Her wrist was tingling again. There was definitely a way here. "You promised to show me." "Cool your jets, jeez." Cail pulled a pair of oddly bent wires from her pocket and knelt. "Luke, distract her. I can't do this with an audience breathing down my neck." Fair. Jane wouldn't exactly have been able to use her fancy new lock-picking spell with someone watching either. She didn't resist when Luke took her by the forearm and guided her down the hall. He turned her around so her back was facing Cail. Jane felt surrounded despite Cail's concentration on her task. She took a step back. Luke noticed her discomfort. He gave her a lopsided smile and stuck his hands in his pockets. "Want me to tell you a story about the courtyard?" he offered. It was a blatant distraction, and Jane couldn't pass it up. "Yes, please." "All right." Luke rolled his shoulders. "I know you haven't experienced it with the stacks, but Cail and I swear the courtyard has a personality." Jane, until then half listening to Cail, locked onto Luke like a hawk. "A personality? Like the stacks? Sounds nuts, right?" He leaned in and grinned as though sharing a secret. In a way, he sort of was. "But I'm not kidding. One time, Cail made an offhand comment about thinking one of the flower arrangements had clashing colors. I thought it looked fine personally. But the next time we came back," he broke off with a snort and lifted his hand to cover his mouth. "The entire courtyard was full of those exact flowers. They only went back to something like normal after Cail apologized." They hadn't mentioned that. Jane's brows furrowed. "The courtyard changed?" "The stacks does too," Luke pointed out. "You can't be that surprised." She wasn't, not now that it had been said. She nodded once, slowly, and ran her thumb over her cuff. "What's it like? The personality," she clarified. He crossed his arms and tapped a finger on his elbow. "Playful. He likes to make little chalk drawings and drop fruit on people's heads. Moves our stuff around so we have to find it. Not malicious, though. Doesn't like to see us really, honestly upset." Jane opened her mouth to ask more, but a soft click from behind interrupted her. "It's unlocked," Cail announced. "Luke, get to knocking." He gave Jane an embarrassed smile and waved her back towards the door. "It goes better when the courtyard knows both of us are coming," he explained. "After you." Jane let him usher her where he wanted and stood to the side. Cail stood up and took a half step to the right, leaving her shoulder to shoulder with her twin. He raised a fist and gave the door 3 sharp raps. The tableau visible through the glass warped in the same incomprehensible manner as the entrance to the stacks had, until Jane was looking at an entirely different arrangement of flowers, trees, and benches. The cobblestone path had turned to concrete covered in chalk drawings. A central tree had grown huge and flowered, revealing it as an apple tree. The benches had become carved white stone. White seemed to be a theme, actually, with all of the flowers being white, pink, or purple. Some of the ones Jane could identify weren't supposed to bloom at the same time, but Jane chalked that up to magic. The tulips, myrtle, bleeding heart, and apple tree she could believe, but crocuses were earlier flowers than the rest. All of the blooms were masterfully, perhaps impossibly, arranged. All right, enough gawking. Cail took the handle and pulled the door open. Let's go before some hapless second grader wanders by. She marched in, and Luke ushered Jane forward. After you, he said. Jane nodded and took her first step into the courtyard. Queries, kudos, or concerns? Like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening.